Would you trust your neighbor, your friend? What about your own child? Because in the Soviet Union, children who reported their parents to the state were celebrated as heroes, and some fathers were arrested because their own children reported them. In that world, the most dangerous place wasn't the battlefield. It was your own kitchen. When you woke up in the morning, the first thing you did was look out the window. Were the lights on in the building across the street? Was your neighbor's car still there? The same check every morning. Without even realizing it, it had become a habit, because when someone disappeared during the night, the ordinary calm of the morning would reveal it. An empty parking space, a dark window, a door that had quietly closed. When you left the building and ran into your neighbor, you smiled. They smiled back. You had lived in the same building for 2 years, but you had never had a deep conversation, because deep conversations were dangerous. Staying on the surface was the safest harbor. When you walked to buy bread, the line outside the shop was already long. It was 8 in the morning. If the line didn't finish before noon, you would go home empty-handed. But you wouldn't say that to anyone. And even if you did, people would pretend they didn't hear. Because complaining meant criticizing the system. And criticizing the system was the beginning of a much longer line. And the end of that line never ended well. Every morning, you went to work with a smile. You had to smile. Because a worker with a gloomy face was an unhappy worker. And an unhappy worker meant someone who didn't love the regime. And everyone knew where people who didn't love the regime ended up. But nobody said it out loud. The production quota increased every month. Your salary never did. Sometimes thoughts about that crossed your mind, but only inside your mind. Without letting a single word escape, you buried that thought before it could fully form. One day, a new engineer arrived at the factory. He was young. He hadn't understood the system yet. During lunch in the cafeteria, he started talking about how inefficient the production system was. Everyone around the table suddenly looked down at their food. No one answered. The silence was so sudden and so deep that the young man understood what had happened. The next day, he wasn't at that table, and you never saw him again. That evening, your child told you about something they learned at school. They had learned about Pavlik Morozov, the boy who reported his father to the authorities after realizing his father had betrayed the state. The teacher had introduced him as a brave and patriotic hero. The glass in your hand trembled. Just slightly, but you quickly placed it on the table so your child wouldn't notice. That night, before going to bed, you whispered with your wife about how careful you needed to be about what you said in front of your child. How even an innocent complaint or a naive question could grow into something dangerous. Your wife looked at you for a long time. Then she turned her head away. She didn't answer, because both of you already knew. And even saying known things out loud could be dangerous. At midnight, a hard knock on the door woke you up. That sound. Everyone living in the Soviet Union knew that sound. An ordinary visit didn't knock like that. The mail didn't arrive like that. In the darkness of the night, that sound meant only one thing. You got out of bed and walked to the door, holding your breath. You opened it. It was your neighbor. His child was sick. He needed aspirin. You gave him the medicine. Closed the door, leaned against the wall, and finally released the breath you had been holding. But the most frightening thing wasn't that. The most frightening thing was the first thought that crossed your mind when you heard that knock. You didn't wonder who had come. You wondered what you might have done. You knew you were innocent. But this was the Soviet Union, and being innocent was not enough to protect you. If you had lived in the Soviet Union, maybe you would never have stepped onto a battlefield. Maybe you would never have held a weapon. Maybe you would never have harmed anyone in your life. And yet every morning, a small part of you would die. Your sense of trust, your feeling of freedom, and the words you wanted to say one day but never could. History tells us about great leaders, great revolutions, and great wars, but it never asked one question. What was it like to wake up every morning as an ordinary person inside that system? The answer was only one word: exhausting. Every morning, every line, every knock on the door, every smile, every word you swallowed. Endlessly exhausting.